What up, guys? Welcome to today's podcast. Today on the podcast, we're going to have a coach, jiu-jitsu practitioner, but as he'll talk about a little bit later on in the podcast, he's definitely become more of a coach. A guy named Sean Applegate from the South. Right now, he has a gym in Atlanta, Georgia, and he originally got started in Gulf Shores. Originally I met him and his crew back somewhere in 2000, I think 2013, 2014, somewhere in that range.
Cool.
They were picking up some mats from the gym that we had. My buddy of mine had them in storage, and he was selling them to different coaches. And then I came across him. Knew him, off and on about who he was for a while. But last January, we were having a local competition. We had this little team tournament thing, and I came across him and some of his guys, and they were really good. And he was a super nice guy. His guys were really cool, and he had a lot of young guys that were doing very well, and I was impressed with their ability. And so at some point I knew we were going to try to get him on the podcast. And so today's podcast is going to be fun. It's one to let you guys kind of get an idea of what you're getting into. Is he'll talk a little bit about kind of how he taught himself jiu-jitsu in some respects, because he was in a place back in the day where there wasn't a whole lot of black belts or high level guys surrounding him. And so he was having to learn jiu-jitsu in chunks and then teaching a lot of it to himself. And then at the same time, you'll get some strategies and some ideas for your own training if you listen to it carefully. And then we'll also talk shop about being a coach and some of the things that he thinks are useful and ideas that could be useful for training. And, we even talk a little bit about the idea versus drilling, situational role gaming, and, the different ideas, because again, everybody is online trying to tout that they have the answer, right? Opposed to what I always say is like an answer. This is one way to solve this problem, right? And so he shares his ideas on it, what's worked really well for him as a coach, which again, I think there's merit to it because he's turned out some decent guys who are his guys, his jiu-jitsu guys from white to black belt and some of these blue and purple belts that he's cranking out, and they're tough dudes. So anyway, hope you guys enjoy the podcast. Hope you gain something from it for your training. And if you're a coach, hopefully maybe you get some ideas that might inspire to kind of get into the gym and maybe mix things up a little bit. And as always, thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never tried CBD out, I always encourage people to try it out for a month and see what kind of effects you feel from it. Again, this is just my personal thought. Anytime I take a supplement, I like to give it a fair shake and try it for a little bit and see how it works for me. And this is something with you guys. I encourage you to be kind of a scientist with yourself, right? Like when you think of our jiu-jitsu, what do? We test and learn. We try these things out. And, sometimes there may be evidence to support our decision and sometimes there won't be, right? And I say that because, again, there's all kinds of claims. There's all kinds of stuff with CBD and things like that. And again, this is with all supplements, right? And I encourage you as a person who's maybe trying to test out and see how things work, try it for yourself and see what kind of effect it has. Again, personally, I feel a benefit to my recovery. Again, training as you get older, personally, I'm becoming more and more focused on recovery because it's so important. When I was younger, I could throw myself up against a brick wall and be ready to go the next day, no problem. Now, stuff lingers around a little bit. Injuries linger around a little bit. Hard training takes it out of me a little bit more. So I need a little bit more help with recovery. And again, I find that CBD is a helpful supplement for that. And so again, if you guys want to check it out, go to their website at charlottesweb.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu30, CHEWJITSU 30 for 30% off at checkout. Also, thanks to Matt at Epic Roll for supporting the podcast. Matt is a jiu-jitsu black belt who makes jiu-jitsu products and apparel for jiu-jitsu practitioners like us. He makes really cool designs, great customer service, good quality stuff. I have my jiu-jitsu rash guards and shorts made by him currently. I'm getting ready to run a gym order for my guys, so they're going to be an Epic Roll gear for the Derby City crew. And so again, I believe in his products. I like them. I wear them myself. And I've had my no-gi shorts and rash guard prototype for going on 3 years now. And again, it's still strong. All of my shorts that I have from Matt, since they don't have Velcro on them, they last for years, opposed to the old Velcro ones, which would typically be done with in a year or two. His gis are also solid. His t-shirts look great. If you guys watch any of my videos or see t-shirt or see any of the posts I make, if you see like the Kimura or the triangle choke or whatever shirt it might be where it has a definition, those are all Matt. And so again, check his stuff out. If you're interested in getting some gear for yourself or for someone else, jiu-jitsu related, go to epicrollbjj.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu20, CHEWJITSU20 for 20% off. Also, if you guys want to support the podcast directly and support yourself with a lot of different ideas from multiple black belts, doctors who analyze the way that people train, doctors that work with people with back problems, and all these different guests that we've had over the last several years, we have our Patreon package or a little bundle that we have when you join. And what that is it's a library of content that you go in. And again, there's bits and pieces from all the guests that we've had where we try to ask them some actionable tip that could be useful to someone training. And again, it's listed out there. And again, I think those can be useful because it's one thing. There's a whole aisle. There's just endless techniques, but it's fun to talk to someone and get an actionable idea, something to implement that isn't necessarily a technique, because you guys are probably up to your eyeballs in techniques, but having some person say, hey, this is the way that I developed this technique. And then you can say, okay, well, this is how I could develop my own technique. Or, hey, this is what I would do if I was training in this situation. Oh, let me try that. Right. And so they can give you some ideas to be useful for your training. And again, it supports the podcast. So it's up to you. And again, if you want to do that, you can go to patreon.com/the Chewjitsu podcast. And upon joining, you'll get access to the library. Also a free or an ad-free version of this podcast comes with it as well. And if you guys want to get my daily email where I talk everything from jiu-jitsu training ideas, philosophies, fun story, books that I'm reading, everything and all, chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. When you join, you'll get access to a couple of ebooks that I give away. One is on training ideas and how to focus your jiu-jitsu in a little bit, which can be very useful if you're trying to break through plateaus, develop new techniques. And then I also give one on game plan design and how to develop your own jiu-jitsu game plan. It's pretty simple. You could go through each one of these books and 15 to 20 minutes, no problem, and have some different ideas that could be useful to you. And again, to get access to it, you go to chewjitsu.net/join. And then once you get those ebooks, you'll then get my daily email where I'll send out different ideas to you, and you can unsubscribe at any time, or you can just enjoy the emails like the thousands of people that get them every day and have some idea to chew on for their training. And so guys, with that said, let's jump into this podcast with Sean. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. So just sort of jumping into it then, man, like how, the first time I think I ever even came across you was years ago. Like I think you and some guys came and picked up some mats from the gym, like some yellow ones way back in the day. So like, it was like my buddy Derek had bought these mats from like some sort of auction from like a military, like fight house. And then he sold them. And then so we were having people come up there back and forth. And it was like a crew of you guys that had come up there to pick some mats up. But I didn't know a whole lot about you. And then obviously the last, couple of years, I've seen you coaching some guys and your guys are killing it. But I don't necessarily know a whole bunch of how you got started and sort of your roots in jiu-jitsu. So, and for anybody listening, how did you get started in jiu-jitsu and how did that whole thing get going?
Well, basically, man, yeah, that whole mat thing is absolutely true. That's actually crazy, honestly. That whole story the connection there is insane, how small the community is. But anyway, yeah, so basically, dude, I got into martial arts. I was like watching some UFC, you know what I mean? Just a typical UFC story, only not like early UFC, right? So I got in probably around the time Machida was like on top in the UFC.
Okay.
So.
How old are you?
33 now.
Okay.
33 on the 1st of November, so just 33.
Okay.
But
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Yeah, thanks guys. So yeah, no, like I just was watching UFC, man, and I was like, this is kind of cool. I was always into martial arts and stuff as a kid, just like as you are, like from a distance, it's like, oh, it's kind of cool, but I didn't do it. I didn't do karate or anything. And then I saw Machida, and I was like, they were like talking about how unique he was. Like, oh, he's this karate fighter, and you don't see good karate fighters in MMA and all this other stuff. I was like, well, damn, I want to do what he's doing. So I started looking up karate. And we try to do some karate or whatever, maybe the way he does it. I found out Shotokan karate, right? I was like, I'm going to go do Shotokan karate. So I looked up some Shotokan karate, went and joined like this little club and did a little bit, not much. And then jiu-jitsu was very quickly right after that. It was like, oh, you got to check out jiu-jitsu. And I was like, okay. And so we didn't have
How old were you around this time?
I was 20.
Okay.
21.
21.
So I was like, all right, yeah, let's check out this jiu-jitsu stuff. We didn't have wrestling in our high schools where I'm from, so I didn't have any grappling. I didn't know what grappling was really like, and I would watch UFC and they would go to the ground and I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then actually only experienced jiu-jitsu for the first time. I went to Decatur and I went to a karate school there in Decatur, which was like 6 hours from where I lived. I just went there on a trip to visit some people, and I went to this karate school, and Brandon McCatherine was there, and he was teaching jiu-jitsu at this karate school, and he was a karate black belt. And Brandon was like, yeah, man, you should check it out, whatever. He was like, Eddie Bravo is going to come and do this seminar. And I was like, all right, cool, yeah. So I went for the Eddie seminar, and that was cool. I mean, meeting Eddie back then was very different because we didn't have as many schools back then. 10th Planet wasn't as big back then, you know what I mean? Eddie was still Eddie, but just everything was on a much smaller scale, you know, a decade ago. So I met Eddie, trained at the seminar, rolled with Brandon. That was like my first experience really rolling with like someone who was pretty good, like other than just fooling around with my buddies. And I was like, okay, so this is like a bunch of tricks. It's like a bunch of magic tricks kind of, right? Like you learn this and then you can just do this to people. This is badass. So I'm going to do this. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go back home and I'm going to do it to my buddies. Like we're going to go to the beach and I'm just going to do this stuff to them. Be like, cause you tell, like, we're kind of removed at this point from like the regular populace, having trained jiu-jitsu for quite a while, especially being black belts, you're like super removed from the regular populace. And it's like, dude, if you can remember being a regular guy that didn't know shit, and you had buddies who were all regular dudes who didn't know shit, that ego where you just go like, I bet I can tap you out.
Oh yeah.
Nobody's getting tapped out. Nobody. All your buddies are like, nah, there's no way.
Yeah.
The dude that weighs 50 pounds less than you, that's your boy, is like, no, you're not doing anything to me, dude. Like, you know what I mean?
Especially being a young guy with that magic power. Like I remember being 18 in my early 20s. Like I was waiting for someone to say like, you can't beat me up, or like, let me show you.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, like everywhere you go, you're just like the opposite of what you should be. You're just like ready for something to pop off. You know what I mean? So it's just like I wish somebody would get up in this Applebee's and give me an excuse. You know what I'm like, bro? Like it's just all old people in there and stuff. Like you're trying the waiter, dude. You're like just, So I was I was like, all right, cool. And then I found out very quickly that it wasn't a bunch of tricks, and that even when I knew what he was gonna do to me, he still did it to me, which was insane. And I was like, probably just like everyone else, the first time you experienced jiu-jitsu, I was just like, okay, this is a superpower. I'm doing this right now. I gotta do this. So I go back to Gulf Shores. I'm like, I gotta get involved in jiu-jitsu. I go to this jiu-jitsu school. There was one jiu-jitsu school. I go to it. Dude, was ultra weird. They were in the gi. They're training the gi. So I walk in, I see the gi, and I see them grabbing the gi, And keep in mind, my only legit jiu-jitsu experience was at a 10th Planet affiliate, right? And so I go in and I see this gi, and I'm like, oh, jiu-jitsu is like karate, so there's all these different kinds, and some of them are more applicable than others, right? Because karate's got there's karate styles that just are insane. So, and then there are like bare knuckle karate styles where they fight and beat the hell out of each other.
Yeah.
There's a guy in Gulf Shores, the actual 10th Planet Gulf Shores, the affiliate, one of my black belts runs it, is inside of a karate school, a guy that did like bare knuckle karate fighting. Like it's gnarly. So I was like, oh, so yeah, this isn't real jiu-jitsu.
This isn't what I want to do.
I left. No, I thought it was fake. I was like, bro, it's fake. They're grabbing the clothes. No one grabs. What are you talking about?
Were they doing like the self-defense stuff?
No, they were just doing regular old gi jiu-jitsu, brother. I just didn't know what I was looking at. And I walked out and I was like, nah, this ain't it. So I called Brandon and I'm like, hey, I went to this jiu-jitsu school, dude. This ain't it. Like, I started I was like, I'm going to tell you a story you're never going to believe. This is what they were doing in there. So I started telling them about what I saw, dude. And Brandon was like, nah, man, that's normal Brazilian jiu-jitsu. We're the weirdos. Like he was like, that's normal. Everybody does that.
Well, a decade ago, I remember that because a decade ago and before that, 10th Planet was the sort of the black sheep as far as that, because people frowned upon it because the gi was so prevalent. And I remember going back to the story of meeting one of your guys was coming in there I was showing him the mats, and I remember that he had a 10th Planet shirt and he had a hoodie on, and he looks at me, he goes, better zip this up. And he zips up his shirt. And I was like, I looked at him and said, why? He goes, and he pulls it back down. He like opens up his shirt. He's like 10th Planet. I was like, bro, I'm a white guy in Kentucky. I was like, I'm not a Brazilian that hates you guys. You can rock out whatever you want to. Jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu to me. It's like, if you're good, you're good. Right.
Yeah.
But I know that a lot of you guys got a lot of hate back in the day.
Yeah, it was like that, dude. It it was a weird situation, but it was just super funny because like looking back on it, like I was like convinced that what I had seen in that school was not it. You know what I mean? I was like, they're doing some weird stuff. This isn't real jiu-jitsu. And then when I found out that like my experience was the weird experience and that they were just doing like what everyone was doing, I was like, oh, imagine that. But the guy that ran the school was a bit of a weirdo. I think he went to prison a year or two later for some pretty wild stuff. So I ended up not training there, and then I went to this MMA school, and like a buddy of mine was training there that I grew up with, and he was like, "Yeah, you should come train with me." So I was like, "Cool." And I went there, and they didn't really have like a jujitsu, like they had a jujitsu class with this guy that said he knew some jujitsu, and then I rolled with him on the first day and tapped him, and I was like, "Nah, nope," because I've already trained with someone who was good. This is not it. So they actually ended up getting rid of that guy pretty quickly as well, from that MMA school. And then they were like, "We want you to be the coach." And I was like,
Whoa.
"There's no way." So I hit Brandon up and I was like, "Brandon, what do you think?" And Brandon was like, "Well, look, man, that's basically what I had to do." He was like,
Yeah.
"There was no jujitsu here." He's like, "So basically Eddie was just like, yeah, man, like just study jujitsu, share with them all the stuff you're working on. Don't try to be something you're not, you know what I mean? And then like maybe one day, whatever." So he basically gave me the same speech. And so what I did was like, all right, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have Brandon come down 1 month and do a seminar. And then the next month, I'm going to go to Brandon for a weekend and try to learn from him.
Mhm.
I'm going to pursue this, like, and you've met Brandon before. Like, the guy's golden. So it's just, like, so easy to put him in that role. Like, it's so easy for me to just be like, "Hey, man, you're my mentor now." You know what I
He's a
mean?
good
He's a great guy. So, and I don't think I'd really ever had a great positive male role model in my life up until that point. Like, and then that was a really easy thing for me. So I just put him right in, and for a year I did that, and I competed like crazy, and Brandon gave me my blue belt, and I was going out to LA once a year to train with Eddie. And then I got my blue belt, and then I went out to LA the next year after I got my blue belt, and I won Gracie Worlds as at blue belt. And Eddie was just like, "All right, man," gave me my purple belt, and I was like a year and 8 months into jiu-jitsu, I was a purple belt, and I was running a program, and I was like, I think I'm out of my depth. You know what I mean? And Eddie was like, "All right, dude, you're ready to be an affiliate. So it's an official 10th Planet school now." And I was like, "Bro, I just got thrust into that position super quick." And it's just been a wild ride. I think I just spent the last however long it's been since then, the last decade, just trying to fill those shoes as best as possible, because I just felt like I got shoved into it. And when I looked around and saw a bunch of dudes looking at me going like, "All right, what do we need to do to build a career in jiu-jitsu?" I was like, I was just like, "Well, I guess I better figure this out pretty quick." A lot of guys asking me those questions.
How did you balance, learning yourself and giving to your students and trying to give them the best information and also spending enough time for yourself to really solidify your game and just give them kind of the best balance of both for yourself too? Because I mean, you can coach a lot and then you kind of take away from your own progression.
Yeah, so it instantly became that thing where like I was training, competing, coaching, and running a business all at the same time at like 21 or 22.
Wow.
Which is pretty like
That's a lot.
I mean, when you're that person, you don't realize how much it is.
Sure.
But like looking back on it, it's like, yeah, that was a wild time for me. But basically, I self-taught a lot of things in my life. Like I always skated and surfed as like a young guy, growing up like on the Gulf Coast and stuff. And I had a friend become like a professional skateboarder. Had a friend become a professional surfer. Like in pursuit of those things all the time. I taught myself guitar. I got a pretty good shot at playing music, you know what I mean, when I was 18, like, and then just, opted not to do it. The financial side of that is not so good, so I chose not to go down that road. Actually, Brandon was a professional musician for a very short period of time as well, and bowed out of it as well, so we had that in common. But my whole life had always been on that sort of like, I need to teach myself how to do this thing if I want to be good at it kind of attitude. And so I just approached jiu-jitsu with the same energy. Like I was like, all right, cool, well, here's what I need to do. It's a lot of self-honesty. It's a lot of accountability. And it's just a lot of like grinding, honestly. And so jiu-jitsu, for me, seemed a lot easier than some of those other things to get good at, because it was like, well, I got swept today. I got submitted today. I got whatever today. And then I could go back and be like, all right, cool. I need to study. So I would get like whatever material I could. I would contact whoever I could. I would travel to train with people. I was in Gulf Shores, it was an hour and a half from Biloxi. So that's where Alan Belcher was. And then 3 hours from New Orleans, that's where Riley Bodycomb and some of those guys were. And so it was easy for me to like sort of have resources, nothing like where I was like directly learning from anyone or like taking classes on a regular basis, but it was easy to make little trips and do little things here and there. And then I competed a lot, and competing, I think if you're open and you're accountable, competing is like skill boost every time you do it. You get a little bump every time you do it. As long as you don't like try to shield yourself from the realities of what happens in matches and stuff like that. So that's really how I did it. I just really went full time from day one. I'm only going to do jiu-jitsu. My wife was super supportive. I was already married. I married my wife at 21, like right before I turned 21 anyway. So she was 100%. She was just like, yeah, you need to do this because you're either going to go to school or you're going to do this. And I was like, I don't really want to. I mean, going to college just sounds insane. So let's just do this. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's what I did.
Especially if you don't know what you're going to do with it, right? Going to college and getting under debt for like a degree that you don't necessarily want to use, probably not the best idea. I've talked about that a lot before. Where like talk about competitions to make you better. I remember from a very early on, like we would talk about it, like a competition was worth like a X amount of time of just regular training. And I have my thoughts on why, but I was curious because again, you become a good coach and you've got a lot of good guys that are coming up under you. What do you think it is about competition that helps make that growth in someone happen? Like, why is it so important for someone who's like, for instance, if someone's trying to get the best they can be at jiu-jitsu, what is it about competition that's going to help that?
Because I think that like training, like, okay, so like we have like the physical, like when we look at jiu-jitsu, we have the physical, and the physical is always truth in jiu-jitsu. Like 1,000% the physical is truth. And then we have like the spiritual, right? Which is a little weird, like kind of your morale, kind of your energy, kind of how you feel about things and why you train even to begin with. And then we have like the mental, which is just like, all of the just thoughts and like what's going on and like the theory and stuff like that. So we have like 3 layers to what we do. And I think that like in training is the muddiest time for that. Like recently had a conversation about like people who give things to people in training, right? And people care about that kind of stuff. Like there's like these conversations that people get into about like, well, like I did this move, and then the guy's like, well, he just gave it to you, or like things like that. And it's like, I think those, even investing energy into that stuff is so useless. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like not to say like giving submissions to your training partners or something is useless. What I'm saying is like caring as the person involved in it. If the other person did that or didn't do that is so far outside of our like necessity in the training room. Like we don't need to do any of that. Like what matters to us is our own training. Like that's it. So training can be muddy in that way. We get confused about a lot of things. Competition isn't muddy at all. I know for sure 2,000% that whatever happened in that match is truth, because this guy wanted to win.
Gotcha.
And he tried as hard as he could, and I tried as hard as I could to win. And if I didn't win, it's 100% reflective of where I'm at. And if I did win, it's the same. You know what I mean? And I can look at that and the results of that, and we can draw real statistics from that, and we can just eliminate all of the gray, like sort of BS that comes along with it. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the insecurities and the ego and all that stuff is just gone. Like competition is almost all truth. And I think that the student themselves has to be open to the realities of competition in order for competition to make that big skill bump for them.
Yeah.
It can't just be this thing where like anyone can sign up for a tournament and get better, because I know a ton of people, like I have seen over the years, a ton of people, whether they were in my gym or not, and they go out and they compete, and whatever the result is, it's whatever they want it to be. If they lost, it's because they got tired or they didn't feel well or whatever. It's never because the other guy was better than them, for sure. And if they win, it's because they are the absolute greatest of all time and they just haven't been discovered yet. You know what I mean?
No accountability on it.
Zero, dude, zero. And it's like they go back to the training room and they're like, yeah, like like I'm sure you run a gym. There will always be these guys that will go out and compete, and they usually never make it past the early stages of all this, but they go out and they compete. And when they win, they're the guys that come back on Monday, back to training, taking the hardest roles they can in the gym, trying to continue to just grind, and they're more confident when they come back is all it is. Whether they won or lost, they're confident that on Monday they're going to be better and they're going to get better. And then there's the guys that come back on Monday and they kind of don't want to roll with the guy that gives them a lot of trouble because they just won on Saturday, and it's kind of like, or they might not even show up Monday at all. They might just be like, Coach, I just competed this weekend. I need to take a break. And it's like, bro, you competed Saturday. It's Monday. Like, you train on Mondays. Like, like it. You can just tell with people generally with it, and it's like you can talk to people and try to express to them the need to be accountable and open when they compete. But if you're truly open and you're truly accountable to the realities of competing, it's just this huge boost, man. You know exactly what you did wrong and what you need to work on. You know exactly what worked and what you need to reinforce. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just so much truth, man. It's beautiful.
Right. Another interesting question maybe to ask you, because you did what a lot of people did back in the day, including myself, which was where, you were in a place that maybe didn't have these big, giant developed programs, black belt coaches, everything else. And you essentially had to go away, travel for hours, get knowledge, go, do all these things. And again, when you started, the instructional market wasn't as like easy as it is now, where you have all this information, and then the seminars weren't going on like they were. There's not as many competitions, all that stuff. What are some ideas? Because my thought is, everyone that goes into jiu-jitsu, even if you have a coach who's showing you stuff, and let's say if you train in a gym and it's a really small gym and it's only like this small knit close group with like the coach who can detail and basically customize everything for each person. That aside, we all know that we all do a little bit of self-teaching and self-correction on our own. Like, we're all trying to work. And even if you were to take a group of people and you show them all the same techniques, everybody's going to have their own spin on things and slight adjustments for their style, body type, whatever. What are some ideas that you think could be useful as far as helping people sort of teach themselves, so to speak? So things that maybe you did when you were coming up that proved very useful into you as far as implementing techniques into your game and being able to use them, during a roll, during a competition, or whatever it might be.
I think that thing that we just talked about is probably the same answer, right? Like accountability.
The reflection. Yeah,
that's all it is, right? Like, what do you say to yourself after something negative happens to you in the physical? Not like not like trauma, you know what I mean? Because that's a whole nother, like, and people put well, I don't know what your background is, but people will put us in these shoes at times to be kind of like psychiatrists for them, and I try to avoid those scenarios 1,000%, because I have no idea what to tell people if they're having crazy thoughts or whatever the deal is. But I think that, like, in the physical, how you respond to physical negativity, so like you got swept by a lower belt or you got submitted, and like in truth, like you were actually trying not to get submitted and you got submitted, so none of this weird, I gave it to him because he was a white belt thing or whatever the case these people say the deal is. But the accountability, that same thing, right? So like I would go and train, and obviously all my guys are my students, you know what I mean? And so I'm training with them and whatever, and if I would get swept, I would be like, dang, that night I'd be like, all right, cool, I got knocked over from that position. I really didn't want to.
Yep.
I didn't concede the bottom position. He took the top position. So I need to think about what I'm doing right there. And so I would immediately begin that process, you know what I mean? And like techniques, right? So like one of the things that happens now, and I think that we just live in an odd time, is guys love to blame the technique because we have a robust sort of ocean of techniques to try and draw from now with all the instructional and access that people have on the internet to jiu-jitsu. It's just kind of like, well, Lachlan said do this, but Gordon said do that, and Danaher said do this, but then I don't know, Craig said do this, so I'll figure out which one I like the most and I'll just do that. And it's like, if you're a hobbyist and stuff, cool, make your jiu-jitsu whatever you want it to be. You're trying to be a high-level competitor, none of the answers that they just gave you are going to work. 0% of them are going to work because you never even took one of them and really tried to understand it at its core of cores. You know what I mean? Like, you never really tried to internalize what they were saying. You just took a move, tried to replicate it to your ability, which if you're like a blue belt, like, you probably didn't replicate it very well. And then you decided that they don't know what they're talking about and you went to someone else for another answer. And it's like, man, like you have like, did you have a coach every day coming up through the belts?
I did until I had a coach pretty much every day until I was a like a early brown belt. Like that's like when I stopped having. I mean, I would teach occasionally as a blue and purple and stuff like that. But once I was a brown belt, I was pretty much on my own.
Mm. So in having that coach, when your coach tells you, "Hey, man, you need to cross face a little better right here. Maybe turn your shoulder a little bit, drop your hip right here. It's a little heavier. Make a little more posture." You're like, "All right, bet." Right? Unless you weren't that guy, but I assume you are. You're a relatively nice guy.
No, we're gonna do it. The coach said to do it. All right, man.
Yeah,
that's what I'm gonna do.
right?
I'm gonna make it happen.
Yeah, like that. Okay, cool. Because why is coach walking over here to give me his energy and time just to tell me to do something stupid that's never gonna work, right? Like that's not real. So with that being said, it's like you get this that thing that you did right there, that accountability, that humility, where you are like, you know what, I'm screwing this move up. I've known this move. Sometimes you're dude, passing the half guard. You've been passing the half guard since you're a white belt. You passing the half guard, still screwing up. You know what I mean? We all do. We all screw up. You lose position. It's like, okay. So then it's like, imagine you're that brown belt and your coach comes to you and tells you to fix your hips, and while you're passing the half guard, and you're just like, nah. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you're going to fix it, because we know that like we're still screwing up. We know that if the technique isn't working, it's probably us. Like we're people, we make mistakes. Like we're not refined in that area enough. You know what I mean? And then I think that like, that's the way that you do it when you have to teach on your own, or when you have to teach yourself and learn on your own, is you have to constantly do that to yourself. You have to constantly go, it's not the move, it's me. And you have to constantly go back to that accountability and that same thought process. Like, okay, I do suck at this move. Like, even though I hit all my training partners with this move, my training partners are not Buchecha. You know what I mean? Like, if I want to be one of the best in the world, then I have to think that there's more depth to this than memorizing a move. I've been training a year. How could I possibly know all the moves?
Yeah.
You know,
well, to your point, it's like I think of techniques as simply like they're like tools.
Yep.
And like for instance, if you and I was in the room with you, you've got your music right there, right? You got your instruments. If you were to grab the guitar and start playing, you could probably play some cool stuff. Me, I can't, because I mean I can play some chords, but I won't be able to hang with you. It's not me, or it's not the instrument that's the problem. It's not the tool that's the problem. It's the person using it. It's me. Right. And so again, a lot of times with like the techniques, you might like you watch an instructional, you see your coach do it, whatever, you practice it a few times. You don't really know you know that it exists, but you haven't really learned the technique. I think about like when you learn a technique, there's a deep internalization going on where the feeling and the intuition that you develop from actually putting it into practice through situational rolling or reps, whatever it might be. And again, that process of taking a technique, and like you said, and then you have partners that change and they adapt to you, and that throws a whole wrench into things. But taking a technique from just learning it to actually being able to use it against someone of similar skill, that is a process that can take a long time. And to your credit, I think sometimes people give up a little too quickly, and they say, instead of saying, hey, well, maybe there's something to this, I just got to keep working at this, and sort of analyze what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. They say, oh, it's not working. This technique sucks. I'm going to go to someone else. I think there's definitely something to that.
Yeah, man, 1,000%, bro. It's just like it's like the ease of access. It's like the dating world and social media. It's like you're seeing someone and you say something that they don't like, and then they're like, "Well, I got these other." Chick says, "I got these other 15 dudes in my Instagram."
I've been swiping right for like a day, so I've got them loaded up in case I need them.
Yeah, it's like, okay, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, like we all live in our own little world, and keep moving and doing our thing, but with jiu-jitsu, that's for sure it right there. And like this is a question that I've been asked a handful of times over the years. Like, well, how do you go about teaching yourself? And it's like, that's how, dude. Accountability is 1,000% how you do it. Like, you just can't ever be satisfied with what you're doing and where you are and how things are going. If you're too satisfied, you stop growing. And usually the guys that have an issue with trying to be comfortable or overly satisfied are the guys that coaches have to ride all the time about getting better in the gym. Like, oh, you have to train harder, you have to do this, you have to do that. And it's like, if you're one of those people, you won't teach yourself, you won't do it. You have to create that accountability for yourself. You would have been the guy, and I'm sure you were the guy in your gym that showed up and worked hard, because that's what it takes. You know what I mean? And those are usually the people you see stick around for the long run, I feel like.
So if some people internally have that, like you had that, that accountability, that ownership of what you're doing, what you're learning, because you, in some ways you had to, because you're the one, if you're not going to learn it, nobody's really going to teach you at this point, because you're so isolated, learning yourself. If you have a student that's kind of struggling with that progression and that accountability, maybe they're blaming you or they're blaming the technique after a tournament. What's your approach to see if you can get them back online and kind of get them to take ownership of what they're doing or the mistakes they're making? And I mean, is that someone, even if they can't do that thing, or is that someone you even want at your gym long term? Because that could be, it could become a cancerous thing. It could lead to, oh, well, so and so doesn't know what he's teaching now. He's not, he's not the right coach, or this or that.
If they blame me,
well, even the technique, or they're not willing to take ownership of, hey man, I'm not as good as, or I'm not doing the right stuff.
They blame me, dude. Fight them. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do that, but
you might
fight them.
Yeah.
Nah, dude.
That's old school.
Yeah, dude. When I say fight them, I mean fight them, fist fight. You know what I'm saying? But no, see, you just, no. I just think like people let their insecurities or whatever like really bear on the mat. Like I think the mat really does like bring a lot out of people. It brings a lot of great stuff out of people, but it can bring a lot of bad out of people too. And sometimes they don't even know that stuff is in there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like imagine never being challenged on a real level for your entire life, and you're like 30. Like never. Like, and when I say challenged, I mean like put in a place where like you want to quit.
Yeah.
Like ever. You know what I mean? Or if you did, it was private. It was never in front of people. Mm-hmm. And now Jiu-Jitsu is going to do that to you. Jiu-Jitsu will do that to everyone, dude. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way you went from white belt to black belt and you never felt like quitting during a roll or in a match or sometimes the sport altogether.
Sure.
It does it to everyone. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is that we can share that, like, together. Like, if you make it through, like, oh, you're a black belt. Like, we can sit down and we can have real conversations, vulnerable conversations. I could say like, man, this was a point where I really considered giving up or whatever. But the thing that we share in common isn't necessarily just that we all felt that way. It's that we all pushed through it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that thing creates a certain bond with people. And I think that like in jiu-jitsu, when someone starts to bear that stuff, that's what you relay to them. I think you go to them and you go, look, man, like look around right now. It could be like if it was like one of our morning class. Usually in the morning class you have 6 or 7 black belts. Like you like look around, like look, man, 6 or 7 black belts in here. Some of these guys are in their 20s. Some of these guys are in their 30s. Some of these guys are in their 40s. All these black belts. They all went through this thing that you're going through right now. Every single one of them, right? And look where they're at. You know what I mean? Like. You know, so it's like if you're having issues, you're having these like psychological issues, it can be like relatable to them first. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like try to be relatable rather than try to be like judgmental or like even dismissive. It's just more like, hey man, like listen, like, you know, we all dealt with this. And then that gives them a chance that gives you a chance to be vulnerable to them. So it gives them a chance to feel comfortable because they feel very vulnerable, right? They're obviously having a struggle of some sort. Mm-hmm. And then once that happens and you have that open line of like communication with them, then you can really communicate like whatever you feel like the necessary steps to overcome that are, right? So you can say like, well, look, man, like you're coming in and you're upset with the jiu-jitsu because you're not having the success that you want. You know what I mean? Like, and that's okay because we've all been there. Why don't you try this? You know what I'm saying? And you just show them something or whatever on the mat and you say like, oh, just try this move right here, whatever. And then you bring someone over and you say like, all right, we're going to drill through this a few times, and you sit with them and you give them some attention. And then you go, look, man, it's totally normal to feel this way. Make yourself vulnerable in that moment. Then you say, all these guys have been through that. We move forward from here. And then you just try to see how it plays out from there. And if they don't grow from that, right? So if it continues to become like this abrasive thing where they're just like, nah, man, then I usually will tell them the same kind of thing. Like, look, man, here's the deal. Not every jiu-jitsu school is for everyone. Okay? Like some jiu-jitsu schools are really good at being accessible to a wide variety of people, and some jiu-jitsu schools are really good at being the best for a very small group of people, right? So it's like, but every school has a certain kind of person that isn't the ideal person for that school, and they're just not gonna, it's just not gonna be a great fit, and it's always gonna feel this way. And if it comes down to that, to me, where I feel that way, then I'll usually tell them, I'll be like, well, look, man, like the struggle that you're having, the specific struggle that you're having is a struggle I think you may continue to have here if you continue to train with us. You know what I mean? Like if someone said like, oh, I had a guy once, it was a really odd scenario. He was a little bit of an older guy. He was a black belt. He comes in to train, and he comes to our day classes, and we do 1 hour of technique and we do 1 hour of rolling, right? And it's not mandatory. Like, you know, the technique obviously is. If you don't come in for the technique, obviously I'm not, you know, it's pretty standard. You're not going to come roll. That's a little weird. But I think like during the hour of rolling, you can leave whenever you want. And we do fives with no rest in between. So you just do 5, 5, 5, 5 for an hour. You know what I mean? And that's to facilitate a slower, smoother training pace. You know what I mean? Like I won't give blue belts to people who can't train for the whole hour. You know? Like it just, I won't do it. Like I tell them all right from the beginning. You know what I mean? So either you're going to go become a super athlete and continue to go balls to the wall for an entire hour, or you're going to learn to slow down.
You're going to slow that pace down a bit.
The necessity to get better at the sport. So, you know, we'll figure that part out. So we do an hour. He would come in. He would train. He was great. Everybody loves this. I love this dude to this day. He's an awesome guy. He would come in. He would train. And he would like I could tell he was like exhausted. You know what I mean? But it was just like he would just push through it. He was already a black belt when he came. So he leaves. I don't see him for like a month. And he messages me and he goes, hey, man, I just want to let you know, I love the school. I love all the guys in the school. You guys are awesome. I've gotten so much better since I started training there. But I think I'm going to start training at this other school. There was like probably like, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles from my school. I'm going to go train at this other school because I, you know, my body just can't hold up to the training. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we don't go like crazy hard. Like, my dudes are like never injured ever. Like, we don't do that thing. Like, so, you know, I was thinking to myself, like, man, that's an odd thing to say. And then he was like, you know, as a black belt and as one of the older guys in the room, I feel like I need to set an example, and I feel like I need to be training every round when I'm there, because if I'm sitting out around, I feel bad about it. I feel like I'm setting a bad example. I'm not living up to what a black belt is supposed to be. And in that room with those guys, training every single round is just tearing my body apart. And I was like, well, I could see that for sure, because most of these dudes are in their 20s. They're extremely competitive. Some of them are extremely high-level black belts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's tough, bro. That's not easy to do. You know, and I tried to express to him that it didn't matter. I was like, you're not setting a bad example, bro. Like, don't worry about it, kind of stuff. But that's how he felt.
Yeah.
Like, in his heart, that's how he felt. And he needed to go to a place where he felt like he could uphold what he felt a black belt was supposed to be. Yeah. And I was like, cool, man. Like, I get it. This was not the right school for you. It just wasn't the right school for him. You know what I mean? And we agreed, and he went to this other school, and I keep in touch with the guy. He's great. I love that dude. It's just like, I was just like, man, this was a great example of like, man, maybe it's just not the right spot.
Yeah. But I think, you know, this is something I think about because, you know, jiu-jitsu relative to the United States, it's still relatively young. I mean, because again, a lot of these areas haven't had black belts on the mat for a long time, right? Like, and so a lot of us, our initial interactions with black belts, it was like a unicorn, right? Especially if you grew up in like a place that wasn't like, say, California or Florida or New York. You basically, they weren't like in the Midwest and the South. There really weren't that many around. And so if you saw one, your interactions with them were, oh my God, this guy's amazing. And then even if you rolled with them, it was like they were untouchable. And then as we start to get older, because this is something I come into now where I'm still good. I'm still scrappy, whatever, but I'm getting older. You know, I'm like 38 now, and I can feel that I'm losing a step. And this is something that I think all of us that got our black belts, it's like, you know, when we were younger, we had to swallow our ego a little bit when we were younger, take our lumps like everyone else. And then maybe, especially if you got good, and you're able to kind of put it on someone. But now we're all going to start to get older, and that athleticism starts to leave us, and we have to have sort of a second, like, dealing with our ego in that sense where, okay, we used to be able to put it on everyone. We used to be able to do all these things, but now, like, that younger blue belt who's really competitive, they might get you sometimes. That younger purple belt, yeah, maybe they have only been training for 2.5 years, but like they're really athletic. They're training every day, and you're old. You're in your 30s, late 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, and your job as a black belt is not going to be able to compete with them every single time. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're not a black belt. It's just reinterpreting what we think a black belt means, because now we're all getting older, and back when I first started, there weren't a lot of old black belts. And if they were, it was like, the guys like the great Helson or someone, there's like these really old black belts, and you didn't expect them to. They never rolled. Whereas now, like, we go from being these warriors, and now we have to put our sword down a little bit and be willing to make way from the new generation. I think that's going to be kind of a thing that a lot of black belts are going to run into over the next 5-10 years as we all start to age out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree, man. I again, like, I tried to basically express my own thoughts about his sentiment and stuff, but really, at the end of the day, bro, like, I mean, I don't even know if I care to try and express my own thoughts for the way most other people feel most of the time. I think it's kind of like irrelevant most of the time, right? Like, if you feel the way you feel, like, what I think about it probably doesn't mean too much. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I tried to just, like, comfort him and say, like, yeah, man, whatever. But but it was cool though. It was understandable for me. So usually, like, and I agree with you 1,000%. We do have to change our own view of ourselves over time. Something that's been interesting for me, transitioning to more of a coaching role and not competing, is that same thing. Like, not competing was a bit difficult to swallow, honestly, for me, because my whole jiu-jitsu journey was about competing to get better and doing all these things. And then I had to learn to study people more, man, to get better. I had to learn to, like, watch tape more and learn that way, because preparing for matches and helping my guys prepare for their matches became more about that. And here's the real truth, man. Like, competing at the highest level of the sport and preparing the guys to compete at the highest level of the sport, studying tape for that purpose is vastly different from just studying tape. Like, when I was a purple belt, I could watch Marcelo Garcia and I could try to emulate him and do those things, right? But I would have been completely screwed if I had been in the shoes of someone who had to fight Marcelo Garcia, because studying Marcelo Garcia to emulate him and studying him to beat him are two completely different things.
Okay.
And so that's another thing too, is like, that bridging that gap, like, oh, I'm going to be a coach now, and, like, not trying to search for improvements to my own game and having to learn how to study people to find the deficits in theirs.
I got you.
You know what I mean? And that for me was, like, very different. So not competing gave me time for that, but also, like, wow, what a difference.
Talk about maybe, so now as being a coach, how do you formulate a game plan? So let's say you got, and it could be just like a super fight or even like a tournament, like an ADCC Open, one of those things. How do you take what your student does versus kind of what they may potentially need to learn or need to be able to do? So how do you kind of formulate your game plans for competition?
It just depends on the athlete and the opponent in front of them. So, like, personalities play a large role in how an athlete develops themselves. So, like, as far as, like, technique and stuff is concerned, I truly believe in, like, a core basic, like, foundation of technique, like, as far as, like, principles and concepts and the application. Whoever has the best application of those is generally going to be the winner of the exchange. It's not really about, like, how you got the application. So I think that's something that people over obsess about. You know what I mean? It's like you have the guys who are doing, like, the games. You have the guys who are just doing, like, mass drilling. You have the guys that are doing, like, the more, like, instructional, like, classroom kind of vibe. And then you have the guys that just don't do it at all. The guys that just drill moves off of videos and stuff. These are all methods for getting applications. These are all methods for learning, like the tools, like Chewy was saying, like getting a tool and like getting a new one. So when it comes to that, I think that, like, how you give your students those tools will ultimately determine what you're working with when it comes time to compare that, or when it comes time to develop some sort of plan for how you are going to use them, if that makes sense. So basically, like I could give you a for instance, like when the guys are getting ready for something, like maybe they're gonna fight someone, and I'm looking at this person, and I'm like, all right, cool. Well, this guy from my gym, he's really good from this kind of like, he like pulls guard, he likes to play the guard or whatever. And I look at the other guy and I go, all right, great. This guy stands like this when he starts his matches. So whether it be like left leg forward, right leg forward, staggered stance, blade, square, whatever it is, he stands like this. And then we'll say the most fundamental answer to someone standing like that is this. And so we'll start there. And then we'll go, all right, well, this guy does stand like this, but he has a tendency to do this. So it's like, okay, we stand square, which is very easy to exploit, but he's really good at keeping his head and his hands in between his opponent and himself, and he likes to circle to his left a lot. So then we'll say, all right, cool, you're going to pull, and you're going to try to attack his stance immediately before he gets a chance to lower his head and his hands. And then once he lowers his head and his hands, if you were unable to get to his stance, we're going to then attack his head and his hands with this technique, which would be the most foundational technique to deal with someone who puts their head and hands in between your hips and their hips. So, like, basically, we just take it from the most foundational point, like the most basic fundamental point, and then we just try to tailor it to their personality. So like, oh, this guy, like Elijah, for instance, I know you guys know Elijah. So Elijah is very lazy in his guard. So a lot of times what we'll game plan for are like these sort of like more like laid back strategies. Like, all right, cool, we're going to let the guy engage to this point before we start gripping and making these movements, things like that. Whereas I have another student named Kevin, who's a purple belt. Kevin's extremely aggressive. And so I'll just be like, all right, Kevin, immediately when you sit, we're going to attack his stance and then make these grips right here. And then when I try to coach them to do the opposite, so if I tell Elijah to be really aggressive, it doesn't generally do well for him. And when I try to tell Kevin to be very like passive, it doesn't generally do well for him either, because those aren't their personality types. You know what I mean? And the thing is once they get out there and they get in the mix and they're kind of in that tunnel vision, so to speak, they're going to fall back on their personalities before anything else happens, if that makes sense. Like, you'll see them fall back into their personalities before you see any other signs of deterioration in the strategy. Before they get tired, before they mess up the technique, before anything, their personalities are going to shine through. And so that's how I go about getting them ready for matches. I study their opponents, try to find the biggest openings we can, and then we try to tailor a strategy that fits their personalities as best as possible.
And kind of going to a point that you were talking about before, because it's I always find it interesting. It's like everybody will basically people will either reword stuff or they'll come up with something, or they like, this isn't the way, this is the way over here. But there's conversations going on about like drilling games or situational rolling or whatever you want to call it, right? And then there's just doing instruction and lots of rolling. I mean, I've seen different people talking about it, and I've seen different gyms, all of which are very successful, go about doing this in different ways, right? And they're all doing very well for themselves. So it's kind of like, well, I don't know which one's better, which one's worse, or whatever. Maybe it's a difference of personality or how they teach. Is there anything that because you said you like on average, like say your morning classes, you're doing an hour of technique, hour of rolling. We obviously know how you're saying about the rolling, doing less rest for a longer period of time to slow the roll, probably get that time in and get the work in, but not getting injuries because you're not going super fast. With your technique portions, do you have a preferred way that you like to do it? Do you like to do more instruction, more drilling, more like sort of gamified situational rolling? How do you like to do it?
So we basically, like at the beginning of the week, we have a day and a night class, throughout the week. Day and night class do different things because a lot of the guys are full-time. So it's kind of like having doing the same thing twice in a day just seems a bit redundant. It makes it a little more monotonous than it needs to be. So I'll just pick a theme. So like for this week, we did some back mount stuff in the day class, and it'll be like one section every day. So they drill one thing for an hour. Okay. And they drill it. They just drill it. They just drill it because it's like there's so much in jiu-jitsu There's so much to jiu-jitsu that trying to learn an application in a very short amount of time doesn't really work that well. You need a lot of time to really digest something. You know what I mean? And I think that like you want to reinforce that as much as you can with your guys because of what we talked about earlier. You don't want the guys to think that like if it doesn't work in 10 minutes, it doesn't work at all. You know what I mean? Like you really want to express to them the need to spend real time. You know what I mean? Like even if you think you've got it, let's keep going. Let's keep digging in. You know what I mean? And so for an hour they'll rep whatever this application, whatever this technique is. And then at the end of the class for the last 10 minutes, I generally will do a situational, but the situational is almost never based on what we did in class. It's always going to be some kind of static positioning that I think that the guys are probably going to have trouble spending a ton of time in whenever they go to their rolling. So like in the day class, we usually do mount, and the night class, we do back mount. So it's like, you don't want your guys to only be getting reps on the mount when they are learning it in class or when they mount each other in live training, because like how often do they mount each other in live training?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Especially if you got two guys like a really good guard and good.
Yeah.
I mean, they might have that guard passing battle going for almost the entirety of the round, and so they may get to the mount with only like maybe a minute left.
Yeah, and then here's the other thing that you get with that too. I do rounds, so I do a 1 minute round.
Okay.
And if the position changes, it's over, and if there's a submission, it's over.
Okay.
And you wait for the next round to
next
start.
minute.
So
okay.
You don't jump back in the mount in that minute. That's it. And then the other guy gets on top, and then after that you switch partners. You get a new partner, right? And so not only does this guy like take like a new guy, maybe a blue belt, right? Blue belt guy doesn't have a lot of mount reps, doesn't have a lot of mount knowledge. You know what I mean? He gets to mount a white belt and work offense, probably, I would imagine, and probably get out whenever it's his time to be on defense. But then he also gets to mount one of the like better black belts in the room that he would never have mounted in live training ever. And he gets to feel what that do. And these are 100% live rounds.
Sure.
And he gets to feel what that guy's doing to get out. He gets to feel what that guy's doing to attack him, which he's probably felt a million times in training anyway. But he gets to see it like from square one, like, okay, all right, I get it. And what it does is like now all of a sudden the blue belts are getting out of mount, you know, at this super high percentage or it's a super high rate because they're doing the mount escapes that they're emulating the black belts. You know what I mean? They have a necessity to learn this stuff. And one of the things that I believe in jiu-jitsu is creating necessity, because if you don't create necessity, people don't pay attention.
Sure.
The thing that you're always ready to hear is the answer to the biggest problem that you have. It's like the thing you're always ready to hear. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like, this is one of the biggest things in jiu-jitsu. I've been taught things that I needed, and I didn't care. I didn't care at all because it wasn't my problem at that time.
You weren't ready for them. Yeah.
Right. And it's like they always say, like, you know, when they're ready to hear it, they'll hear it. And it's just like, all right, cool. Well, let's make them ready to hear it right now. You just got stuck in the mount. Let's talk about mount escapes, dog. Like, you know what I mean? So, and so it's just how many times, all I'm really trying to do in that room every day is recreate that fire that you have when you come back from competition and something went right or something went wrong. I'm trying to recreate that thing as many times as I can in the shortest amount of time possible, because that's when you see insane monumental growth in people that actually care enough to put the time and energy into it to get good at it.
I gotcha. Yeah, it's like the idea, the information. What is it? The information is more useful when it's in the nick of time instead of ahead of a time. And I always think about like getting guys into positions. Like sometimes, like when we'll start a new like block of training with a different position, I'll sort of set them in and just let them basically get into the position, and I'll put them into like some situations sometimes that I want to work from, but I won't give them a whole lot of instruction in the beginning, so I can see what they do, so they can fumble around a little bit, and then it's like, hey, I've got stuff to show you now. You just got done getting rolled out of this position or whatever. Now let's going into it, and you're going to have those questions because it's like plowing the field and then planting the seed.
Yeah.
We break up the soil a little bit, break up that like like you said, like you need this, like by letting them kind of mess it up a little bit, then you can come back to them and say, hey, I have what you need, and you'll be willing to listen to me, opposed to I haven't had that sting of getting kicked out of mount or getting escaped from or getting submitted. So not my problem right now. Like, I think it's a good point.
So you nailed it, right? And it's like first day of jiu-jitsu. Like people talk about the first day of jiu-jitsu. What do you teach them first day of jiu-jitsu? People will say, well, I teach them how to get out of side control. Nobody cares. They don't care, bro. You're teaching them how to get out of side control on their first day. That's not the magic of jiu-jitsu. No one cares. Teach them a rear naked choke.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Seriously, like teach them.
Give them a submission. Give them something where they're like, I can make some guy do this tap, because at the end of the day, what do we want? We want that's what we all want.
That's what I'm saying, dude. Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, but here's the deal though.
Yeah.
Day 3, teach them that side control escape. Because they've been getting stuck in side control, brother. They're ready to hear it. You know, they don't even care about the rear naked choke anymore. Like, look, man, that's cool, but I think you guys live in a fantasy world because I just been getting stuck under this guy for 3 days.
That's right.
You know,
it's kind of like it's a little bit of a mental game, isn't it? It's like you're teaching them what they know they're gonna need, but they don't know they need it yet. But you want to excite them a little bit and show them, well, here's a rear naked choke you saw in the UFC or whatever, just to get, oh wow, I'm doing the stuff that they're doing in the UFC, for example. But then like you kind of start to show them once they get into the role and they realize that you're going to be stuck in mount, you're going to be stuck in bottom side control, you're going to be, somebody's going to have your back. Then you're like, well, all right, how do I get out?
Yeah. So that's another thing too, is like, you can over time, you can develop a culture where they understand that that's a thing for them too. You know what I mean? Like we know that that's a thing for us. So surely they could know that's a thing for them. That's when you really start to drive home the idea that like what wins and loses matches at the highest level is not that armbar you're really good at. It's the grip fighting you did to gain the underhook, to get the knee pick, to get the guard. But you know what I mean? Like it was like, like I express that to them all the time, bro. I'll just be like, look, like, yeah, man, like if you could put Andre Galvao in that inside heel hook, you could break his leg. But here's the thing, brother, you'll never smell his leg,
right?
Because you don't have a good enough this or that. And then once they realize that, they're like, oh, like about the time that they're running through the expert division at the local Nagas, they're like, oh, it's not a question of can I break the leg if I can get it. It's a question of can I get the leg at all.
That's right.
That's
right. Like you talked about the foundational, like core, like breaking it down to the most foundational element, which in a lot of cases is like your grip fighting, your body positioning, off balancing, stuff like that.
1000%, man. And that's the key.
Yeah, I've had conversations with several of you guys that train there, and they spoke highly about your coaching style. And some of these guys had trained in other places, and they really like the way that you do things. Curious about that, because I know you have. I don't know the structure of your gym, but I know you do have a good group of pros that are like basically training all the time, competing and everything else. If you have, I don't know if it's a mixed gym where you have like pros and then you're like regular people and hobbyists, but if you do, how do you balance out everything? Do you have like another coach that helps out, or do you just basically, try to mix everything in? How do you go about running your gym with balancing your pros versus your hobbyists? If you have any, if you don't have any hobbyists, then how do you balance out training the pros, and how does that work?
Well, we do, we do have some hobbyists at the school. I mean, we have like a healthy school. Like we obviously aren't like going under. So it's impossible, I think, to have only pros unless you have like some kind of financial backer.
Sure.
Because most of those guys aren't really paying, or if they are, like, what are you really charging them? They don't really do anything else most of the time. So we have about 15 to 20 guys, I would say, that train full time, which is a lot. But
that's a good squad.
Yeah, it's a lot, but it's not. They're not like even the majority of the student base. But we have a lot of hobbyists. I teach all of what we call the all levels classes. And then my black belt Chase teaches the fundies and intermediate classes and the kids classes. Which sounds like he teaches a lot more, but it's actually less, I think, when we put it all out there. But he does that for me. So he's great. Chase is awesome. He's like the most likable person of all time. So he works with the kids. He works with all the new people and stuff like that.
That's great.
And then he takes all of the all levels classes and trains. Obviously, he's there full time. Competes professionally himself. And so basically, I coach I teach those classes. I coach all those guys, and it's actually like a pretty rough, like that idea of coaching like that is it's something I'm really wrestling with a lot, honestly, because
How do you mean?
so like my kind of coming up in jujitsu, I felt
Hmm.
like I built a foundation to stand on. Like it was like, all right, I need to compete, I need to train, I need to roll with everyone in the school. I just had this like core set of like values I think a coach was supposed to have, like etiquette that a coach was supposed to keep, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And then as I've just dove headfirst into this rabbit hole of being a coach, a lot of high level coaching sort of ideas contradict what we see in jujitsu as like a great coach, right? So like
Mm.
rolling with your students is something that I've always prioritized at a high level, and I think that it's something that as we explore like more high level coaching is completely the opposite. So like
Mm.
Danaher, for instance, right, is arguably the best coach in the world, and I say that because of credential.
Yeah.
Uh, I just can't see a case against him. So it's whether you like, like, and not to say you guys specifically, but some people, whether
Yeah.
they like him or not, it doesn't matter. He's incredible. So
Well,
it's
people don't like whoever is like the top dog and whoever is doing well. They don't like it, but it's like there's lessons to be learned there from it. It's like obviously the guy is producing a lot of really talented grapplers that
yeah,
are very highly skilled in winning.
yep.
So you can dislike it because maybe it's different, right? Or you can
Mhm.
say, what are they doing? And maybe there's some ideas there that I
Yeah.
could learn, right?
Oh,
So
I agree 1,000%. That in and of itself seems like a societal principle we live through. People
agreed.
just generally do that. I don't know why, but and then on a personal level, whatever. But he is the best, and I have had I was fortunate to be doing submission only in the early days of submission only, as it stands currently, and I was around those guys a lot before people really knew. Like I remember Gordon as like a 165-pound purple belt. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like Eddie Cummings, all those guys around them a lot. And one thing that I got recently, actually talking to Oliver Taza, I asked him like, hey man, like, Oliver is a great dude. Oliver is like one of the nicest dudes of all time. Like he's a lot like Chase, in my opinion. Everyone loves him. Like you'll never hear people be like, man, that Oliver Taza guy is just a piece. You know what I mean? You'll never hear that. He's awesome. And so I was like, bro, like, why do you stay with John? I know, like, obviously you're still really cool with a lot of the B team guys, and stuff like that. And like
Mhm.
Oliver's not Gordon. He's not winning everything he competes in. You know what I mean? And it's like, why do you stay with John, dude? Surely you've been given offers that would be incredibly good for you to go and teach somewhere or do something or whatever. And I was like, he doesn't train with you guys. There's a lot of stuff. And he was just like, well, man, honestly, John makes me better at jujitsu. And I
Mhm.
was just like, all right, well, I mean, yeah, that's a pretty straightforward answer. He's just like, yeah. He's like, he tells me what I'm doing wrong, and he gives me corrective advice, and it works, and I get better. And that's why I train with him, because I've never trained with anyone that was able to consistently do that as well as him.
Mm.
And I was like, well, I mean, that's about the only reason that you need, honestly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, as long as there's nothing crazy going on, like,
Sure.
that's pretty good. That's the reason you go to a coach to begin with, I think. So that's pretty good, bro. But what he was saying was like, there aren't a lot of coaches in the sport. And I was like, every gym has a coach, man. What are you talking about? You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
he was just
Mhm.
like, he's like, not really, And this kind of fed into an idea I've had for a while, that like
Sure.
we wear hats. Like there's a coach, the mentor, and the instructor. There's three things that they try to make us do for them,
Mhm.
and we don't all necessarily try to be all three of those things. And I don't think anyone is all three of those things very well. I think there are people that are two of those things really well, and we look at those guys as some of the best. And then there are people out there that are really good at one of them, but
Mhm.
I think like there are three, right? And so he was like, yeah, there aren't really a lot of coaches, man. He goes, John does not roll. So basically when he's coach, and we all kind of know that about him, so it's like
Sure.
whatever. But he's like, John doesn't roll, so he's always coaching, he's always watching and helping us when John can't be there, right? This was really surprising to hear. Gordon, or whoever it is at the time, if Gordon's not there, someone else, but Gordon will then coach. And when Gordon coaches, Gordon does not train.
Mm.
And it's like, well, what happens if John has to leave in the middle of one of Gordon's camps? Then Gordon coaches and Gordon does not train because the coach does not train. The coach coaches. And I was like, it's like a hard rule for you guys. And they're like, yeah, someone has to run the training. Someone has to coach.
Yep.
You know? And I was like, oh, I mean, as long as I've done it, like even training or as anywhere I've been, like usually the reputable coaches train in the sessions. They roll with their students, and some guys don't even teach. They literally just train with their students, and they have their students teach the classes and stuff. It's like it's a thing that you see, you know. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting, man. Like, so basically at all times at you guys' program, there's a guy sitting there coaching, just not training ever. And he's like, yeah, pretty much. And he's like, I'm just not really ready to go be that thing. So I'm still there training and doing my thing, you know? And I was like, oh, okay. And that was kind of the answer he gave me. And it kind of shocked me because I was like, man, in jiu-jitsu, that sounds so taboo almost. You have to train with your students. You know, I think people criticize John all the time because he doesn't train with his students and say terrible things about him that are unwarranted.
He also, but, you know, again, there's, when people say that, you're like, bro, the guy's like, he has some different circumstances, one with his body and things like that, that could make it not a smart idea to be training all the time with a bunch of guys. And, you know, as you get older, but again, there is something to that about being able to sit there and watch people as they're doing stuff. And then in the moment you can start to like, oh, here's where they're having trouble and be able to pick that out. Whereas if you were rolling over in the side, well, you might be able to give that one person attention, sure, but you won't be able to like go around and like grab people while they're having these moments and be able to take a collective view of what's going on in the class because you're focused on this one person at a time. And I mean, granted, you could roll with different people and kind of get an idea of different problems and solutions you could help them out with. But there is something to be said, to your point, about being able to like take a step back like any other coach in any other sport and be able to like watch what's happening, and so, almost like the conductor, being able to look at the orchestra and look at what's happening and being able to assess and maybe make adjustments to that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And that's the nail. You hit the nail right on the head right there. Like that last like little statement. It's like, bro, no one else does that. Go to a high level wrestling practice. The coach is not wrestling with these guys. Go to a football game, bro. Nick Saban is not about to get out there. You know what I'm saying? Like, think about that for a second. It's like, it's easy to look at those scenarios and go, well, those guys are older.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with it? It has nothing to do with it. Nick Saban's not the quarterback because he's old. You know what I mean? His role has nothing to do with throwing that ball at all. Now imagine if one of the quarterbacks looked at Nick Saban and said, why don't you come out here and throw the ball?
Yeah.
How wild, how just like insane would that be? Any football fan would hear that and go, what's happening right now? This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But in jiu-jitsu, it's the opposite. It's, well, if the coach needs to come out here and hold it down, like needs to come out here and do this and do that. And it's like, sure, I guess if you look at your coach as like the baddest dude in the room, if that's how you want to see your coach, then yeah. But you should probably go to a gym where the coach tries to be the baddest dude in the room then, I think. But if you want a coach that's going to help you as the athlete produce the best results for yourself that you can, I don't think the coach is necessarily your training partner. In some instances, maybe. But the coach needs to be able to help you get better at jiu-jitsu. That's the point. Not to be your training partner, but to be your actual coach. If he doubles as your training partner, that's pretty cool. Those are really nice things to have. But it's like, I mean, over the years training with people, you know, I trained with Eddie before Eddie's back got really bad and he couldn't really roll a lot. I trained with Eddie a bunch of times, and I never really put stock into the outcomes of those roles in regards to like the things he wanted to tell me about jiu-jitsu. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was like, well, if Eddie can't fuck me up, I'm not listening to him. There's never a thought in my head ever.
Of course,
not once, bro. And then with Brandon was the same thing. I roll with Brandon. Like, I never thought to myself, like, well, Brandon's opinions don't matter because he can't tap me. So,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, never thought that in my life. And it's like, I don't know why I had this idea in my head that like you have to be this thing. And so stepping away from that, those ideas, that's what I mean when I say like wrestling with this trying to be a high level coach thing is hard for me because it challenges most of what I know about being a coach in jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Like, it really challenges those things. Competing was a big one. Like, the decision to stop competing for me came because I had so many full-time guys competing that I never got time to recover from training. So it was like train Monday through Friday hard, and then Friday night go get on a plane while everyone else goes home to rest, and then come back Sunday exhausted, show up Monday to train. I'm still exhausted from the weekend and all the travel, and they've all been at home for 2 days recovering, and they're ready to like bang again. You know what I mean? I'm like, bro, how I don't know how you're supposed to do this. You know what I mean? And then I started noticing the coaches around me that were like pretty high level competitors that were still coaches weren't going and cornering their guys like ever really. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, I get it. This is what you guys were talking about when you said you got to be selfish. Yeah. You guys were just like, I can't go corner you guys. I gotta rest. I got a match coming up. And then it became a question of like, who do I put first? Do I care enough about competing to not put my guys first? Or do I care more about my guys? And maybe I just let that part of my career end and move on. You know what I mean? And that was hard to wrestle with as well. Getting through that wasn't nearly as hard as like sitting out of training to try and coach the guys when they have big matches coming up, because then you go like 3 days and you're like, bro, I have to train today. I have to roll today. Like I have to get on the mat today. And then you go in there and it's just the same. They're just there waiting for you. Like, you know, like, all right, cool, man. What are we doing today? What do I need to work on today? And you're like, all right, boys. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and when you can be their training partner too, that helps. Like, for one of the ADCC Opens, one of our big strats for the ADCC rule set was like forcing half guard passing on people. Yep. Works really well in that rule set. And so I was like Ryan's training partner for one of the Opens, which helped because I got to roll a lot. You know what I mean? But it was like, you know, but that's what I mean when I say wrestling with it. It's just like you have to be open to challenging your own ideas and your own stance on things at all times. Otherwise, progress becomes almost impossible. And I think that's one of the shortcomings we have in jiu-jitsu right now with a lot of guys who are trying to be coaches, is trying to live up to this sort of weird model that's almost antiquated at this point. Like, what other high-level sport do we have where the coaches are expected to participate at the highest capacity in the sport or with the athletes on their given team? That doesn't exist outside of jiu-jitsu for the most part.
Agreed. Yeah, it's a tough thing for us because one, we all like rolling. It's fun. And then two, again, going back to this ego idea, we all have an ego. It's not something you get rid of. And so we have this ego, this identity that we build of ourselves. And, you know, especially if we like who that person's becoming, right? Maybe you're doing really well at competitions and you're in good shape and you're good when you roll and you're submitting people, whatever. You can really come to become attached to that idea, that identity of yourself. But then in a lot of cases, it's like, the idea is like, they'll talk about the hero's journey. There's the call, right? Something's giving you that urge to say, hey, there's something over here that we need to explore. And, you know, you can either refuse that or you can go with it. And for you, it's like, okay, there's this idea that I have that maybe I shouldn't be rolling all the time with my guys. Maybe I should actually be coaching them. And that's hard to wrestle with because now you're letting go of an identity of yourself that was competing, that was winning, that was doing these things. And now you're saying I'm doing this instead. And that's a tough thing to deal with. I know that, like, you know, even for me, like, that's something I struggle with too, is like, you know, I've competed and stuff like that. And I'm like, when do I stop just doing this? Because when am I just going to go 100% all in on everybody else? Because am I just going to continue to win competition medals or whatever? Or like, I've won some that I like, whatever. Or do I now take this energy and I focus on these younger guys that could win something big and can create an environment for them? And that's something that I'm trying to work in now. And to your credit, like with what you're saying, I'm starting to mix in classes where I'm not rolling and I'm sitting out watching, taking notes of people, giving corrections as I'm seeing them, things like that, and making notes for the next classes, and then still working in because I still want to roll. So I'll mix it in. I also don't have like a bunch of full-time guys like you do. So it's a little bit easier for me, but still trying to mix it in because obviously to your thoughts, I look at jiu-jitsu and a lot of times, whether it's the strength training or the methodology of training, a lot of times we're like 10 or 20 years behind other sports. You know, like jiu-jitsu, there's still a lot of people that are like, what do you do for training? Just fucking go hard all the time. Right. Okay, no other sport where people are getting paid millions of dollars to do this. If that was the way to do it, those guys that are getting paid like millions of dollars, they would have done the same thing. But obviously, it's not the smart idea. And then, like with the coaches, yeah, you know, if that was the best way to coach, then they would take the quarterback right off the field. He would be sitting on the side coaching everybody, and he'd say, you know what, if you can't throw the ball, watch me, I'm going to do it. Right. But that's not what coaches do. And again, I think it's a thing that I think the sport itself is wrestling with. And I think over time, it'll slowly phase that out, that idea where the coach has to be able to whoop everybody's ass. But even when you think about it, guys like, say, Jacare, like the older one that run in Atlanta, I don't know where he lives now, but it was in Atlanta. He wasn't in there just killing everyone. I mean, he was like the guy facilitating everything. And they had multiple guys coaching. And so I think it's weird that we know that some of the guys are coaches and they're not going to be rolling and beating everybody up. But then at the same time, for some reason, we expect other people to do that. And we look down on them if they don't. I don't know what that is.
It's just an antiquated view, I believe.
For sure.
Do you think, like, I mean, obviously to be sharp on the mats is, I think, can be helpful in your coaching, just because you're feeling the movements, you're feeling what, so some rolling is necessary, I think, to an extent. It doesn't have to be like, going 60 minutes, 5-minute rounds every so often, but you can hop in here and there. I think it's good to get a feel for it, and the intensity can be modified, whatever you need it, because you're a coach and your primary goal is to coach, not to compete. For you, kind of, how do you still incorporate some rolling into your training, and how much do you do now as you've kind of become a full-time coach?
Man, imagine if I did. Imagine if I was like, I don't roll.
Some people are like that. Hey, some people are like that, right?
No, I can't. I wouldn't do. The thing is, for me, I made that decision. I am just like a super obsessive person when it comes to things like this. Like, if I want to be good at something, or if I want to develop something, you get obsessed with things, and I really do. And so generally with these ideas like this, I get like really obsessed, and I have to come to a conclusion. If I can't come to a conclusion, like, it eats me up, I'll usually just leave it behind, And when it came to the rolling thing, all right, what am I going to do? Am I going to roll? Am I going to continue to roll every session? Am I going to roll no sessions? So extremes, where are we at with extremes? And then also, is there like maybe a median for me? So what I do is I've had to balance it, man. I've just had to balance it. And the way that I balance it generally is, what kind of energy do the guys have? Where are they at? Are they high energy right now? Are these going to be their best rounds? Okay, great. I'll watch. Let me coach. If it's like late, like right now, like this week, bro, I'm not sitting on the side hounding these guys about how their technique needs to improve, like the week of Thanksgiving. You know what I'm saying? Like, bro, come on. Like, give these guys a break, And a conversation that Ryan and I just had the other day, like, for the last 3 months, he's always had something happening, like, as far as tournaments are concerned, to like have to focus on. And so he's not had a single day in 3 months where he hasn't had some extremely high level task in front of him that he has to accomplish. And he still has one. December 22nd is CJJ Worlds. He has to defend his title there. William Tackett's in the bracket. There's a few other high level guys, and it's like throughout the holidays, throughout all this time, he's not had any time to breathe. He's had to strain and just focus and stress, and it's a lot on an athlete to do that. And, we talk about that. So for me personally as a coach, it's like, all right, cool. Read the room a little bit. Like, try to find what's going on with the guys. Like, how are they going to receive the coaching? What kind of coaching do I need to do? What kind of programming do we need to do? Like, do we need to add pressure to them? Do we need to take pressure off of them? Are they actually slacking, or are they tired? Like, where are we at? You know what I mean? Because overtraining is a thing, and overtraining isn't just physical, it's mental as well. So we have to be very careful about that. So the way that I balance out my own training is generally based on, like, all right, what is this session? What's the energy behind this session? Where are the guys at? You know what I mean? Like, or another thing is like, are my main training partners here? Like, I have a handful of black belts that I train with extremely regularly who are pretty good, and most of them don't compete because, like, maybe they're a little older, or they just don't, or whatever the case may be. So I get like guilt-free training with them. Like, it's like I can just go with these guys, and they're there and they enjoy it, and we get to hang out and train, and it's like cool. But then, like, that's the way I handle it. And it's a pretty light environment, I would say, in the gym. You got a bunch of full-time guys, so they also too. But that's the way I balance it, man. I just try to read the room. I don't have like a set schedule. It's not like Monday I train, Tuesday I don't, Wednesday I do. It's nothing like that, because that's not if you don't adjust with the ebb and kind of flow of the room with the guys and their stresses and strains and exhaustion, then I feel like you just end up making a bunch of mistakes. Like you know what I mean? Like you end up like kind of riding them when you shouldn't, or not riding them when you should. Like, if that makes sense. Like,
For sure.
you want to be like a firm coach, but you don't want to be like a dickhead. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to be like he just did 10 straight rounds. In the 11th round, he sat out, and you go, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, bro, you didn't see the 10. You only saw the one where he sat down. Like, Ryan got really tired the other day. I was coaching him, and he wrestled up on a guy, and he missed a single leg. And I was like, bro, we're gonna have to spend some time drilling your single legs. And he like looks at the floor for a second, and then he like looks at me, and he's like, bro, I'm so exhausted right now. And I was like, I'm not saying because you missed one single leg, you're screwed. We need to fix your single leg. I'm just saying accumulative over the last like handful of days, I've seen you miss a couple single legs, brother. And he's just like, all right, I get it. And then later on, he like even apologized. I was like, you don't owe me an apology. You're fine, brother. You were tired. Like I could tell.
Stressed. Yeah.
You just looked at me in that moment, and I thought to myself, make sure I say this to you so that I don't forget to say this to you. We can come back to it later. Like we don't even have to drill it today. We can do it next week if you want to. Let's just make sure that we come back to that, because this is an area. And then he of course he's cool. And it's like, imagine if I actually had been going up to him to be like, yo, like, to, like, oh, Ryan's being lazy, or, you know what I mean? Like, it probably would have stressed him out so much, and like, so that's the way that I do it. It's like, oh, the guys are extremely tired. Maybe I'll roll today. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I'll give them a break. Maybe they don't need me watching them today.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got one more, man. And I'm just curious, you've created a lot of, or you've helped promote a lot of high level competitors and a lot of, high level black belts. What do you look for in a black belt? Like, what does a black belt mean to you as far as, jiu-jitsu goes?
So for me, I don't know. This is a conversation I had with some of the black belts the other day. I feel like I'm still just kind of trying to learn that thing. You know what I mean? Like I've promoted 7 black belts, but 6 of them were all at the same time, and they were people that have been with me for a very long time. It's really difficult for me because I don't like the idea of like holding them all to some kind of crazy moral standard. You know what I mean? It just feels like a basic moral standard, but nothing crazy like, oh, they need to be the best people in the world, or they're not getting black belts. And I also don't believe you should hold them to this crazy high skill standard either, because not everybody's going to be a world-class black belt. You know what I mean? Like, that's tough, So for me personally, what I do with the guys is like, all right, white through brown belt, this is just about like trying to learn all of the basic movements and principles and concepts that apply to the art of jiu-jitsu. That's what we're trying to do, like white through brown. Like, you can get your blue belt and not have great guard passing, but your guard's really good and you got a couple moves you're really good at. You can get your purple belt if, you fix the other side of the game for yourself. You can get your brown belt if you got a pretty good grasp of everything, but you're just like, missing a couple small things or whatever. But for the black belt, I think they have to have a working understanding of all of the basic principles and concepts of jiu-jitsu. And when I say a working understanding, I mean like you're applying these things. They're not just things that you say that you memorize, because I said them 20 times over the last however many years you trained with me. Like, they matter. And then the final thing that I make them do is they have to be able to create dilemmas in their jiu-jitsu. If you can't do that, I can't give you a black belt 1,000%. Like, it's almost like a test. They have to create one that I never taught them, and be able to explain it in its entirety to me. And if they can, and it works, and it's a true dilemma, then I feel like they're pretty ready for that. But if they can't do that thing, it tells me that they don't have a working understanding of all of those things that we talked about. And I think that thing is the key to jiu-jitsu, honestly.
Yeah, because if they understand their style, they've developed their own system of grappling, that kind of thing, then they understand that there's these points, these crossroads where you've now given your opponent a choice of problems that they have to choose, and they can either give you this, which then gives you this, or they give you this, and then this gives you this, and that gives you that gives a clear understanding as to looking at your game instead of it being like just sort of like ABC. instead looking at it almost like a map full of like a main roads with side roads and different things that you can take depending on what your opponent, their reactions to that, and it shows that you have it mapped out pretty well.
Yeah, man, and I really believe like if you can't do that, I really believe that you don't have like a working understanding of some of those basic ideas, because that's what really leads to limiting your opponent. You know what I mean? Like it's not really about like having this fancy game as much as it is like, well, the reason that you can't create a dilemma in your, mount is because your understanding of how to control with your hips is pretty poor. You know what I mean? And it's like the only reason this person has a third way out is because you just don't understand how to stop a basic knee elbow, or you know what I mean? It's like that third option, that trilemma scenario usually only comes up because of a deficit, not because of the position. Now, sometimes they do pick some pretty weird positions that weren't going to present real dilemmas anyway. You know what I mean? And it's like, I would go somewhere else with this, bro. Like, maybe don't try this one so much. But for the most part, man, it's like, and then you teach them that. But all the guys I've given the black belts to did that thing. I was like, create a dilemma that's unique to you, that I never showed you, you didn't get from anyone else. Come show it to me. And if it's good and you can explain it well, then you're on track. And every one of them did that thing. And so I think like a basic moral standard, you're just not a complete piece of garbage. You know what I mean? Like, I think there is a certain amount of trust that goes into it. I think that's something I'm finding now. Like, you have to be able to trust the person to a certain degree. I didn't really see that one coming. You know what I mean? But I think
if that dude's going to be repping your name, you got to be able to trust him to a degree, right?
Yep. Yeah, man. And it's just like, I find that like my involvement with people is relatively light. Like, I don't need you to be my best friend for us to have a relationship. Like, we can have a working relationship or whatever. But if I just feel like I'm so touch and go with people that like, if I feel like I can't trust you, like there's got to be more to that. You know what I mean? So I just kind of go, you know what I mean? Like, so basic moral standard, basic skill standard, obviously beyond creating a dilemma. Like, if I roll with you and it feels like rolling with a white belt, I can't give you a black belt. Like, okay. But, you don't have to be a world champion. I mean, geez, Louise, what kind of standards are we creating for these people?
A standard that most of us can't reach.
Nope. Right, dude, right. Like, what are we saying? So I think that's my outlook on black belts. I've given a black belt to one guy that was already a black belt in the gi. He wanted to get a second, like he wanted like a specific no gi black belt. And I was like, okay, sure, man, whatever. I don't generally try to do that, but if you want to do that, I'll do it for you. And then I want to say everyone else that I gave a black belt to is not a black belt.
Okay.
Most of them have been from white to black with me. Elijah got his belts. Elijah was with me since he was like a blue or a purple, but he trained at a gi school as well, and they ranked him. And he just never really expressed like wanting to specifically get the belt from me until black belt. And then he was like, and then he turned down a black belt and was like, I don't want a black belt from these guys. I want this black belt from you. And I was like, oh, well, okay, sure. You know what I mean? Like, that's fine. Ryan came to me as a brown belt, but Ryan also, I will say, like, honestly, like, Ryan really didn't know much. I think he was like training in the gi a lot, which was cool, but I don't really think, I think they kind of like gave him the gringo treatment, honestly, man, based on his own like admission. He just kind of felt like it was just like the meat grinder every day. Like, he was
kind of the outsider.
Yeah, man. Like, he wasn't really learning like technical jiu-jitsu. Those are his own words too, though. Like, this is what he's telling me. But so anyway, Ryan, and then, of course, Chase, Josh, Tori, Justin, all those guys, they were all white belts, at the school. And then Tony Anthony Burian, he's Henzo black belt, and then he came to me and I gave him also that. He was the guy that wanted the no-gi black belt, so I was like, cool, man. He's one of my main training partners. He's an incredible black belt, but wanted the other one, so whatever.
Cool, man.
That's cool, man. Well, yeah, bro, I appreciate you being on. I when I ran across you guys this past January, I obviously knew who you were. I'd heard about you before, but then watching like some of your guys, and especially some of those young guys get after, they were they're still really young as far as years and experience, and they looked very good. And I was super impressed. So I started kind of keeping tabs with you guys afterwards, man, and you're doing good stuff. And so it was a pleasure having you on and talking shop. If anybody's listening to it and they want to follow you or sort of see what you and your team are up to, where can they find you?
So you guys can follow on Instagram. Applegate10p is my Instagram. If you guys want to keep up with that. The School 10 Planet Atlanta on Instagram. I would say probably don't try to go the Facebook route. My Facebook is extremely under-maintained. Like, I think the friends list has been maxed for quite a long time, just because I've never gone back and deleted like weird random accounts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so,
I'm there with you.
yeah, the Instagram. If you guys need anything, if you guys have questions about anything, you can always reach out on Instagram or Facebook Messenger. BJJ Fanatics, exploring outside heel hooks. Got to plug it, I guess. Like, check that out if you guys want to. If you guys want to check out some outside heel hook stuff.
Cool.
Absolutely. All right, brother. Appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much. Good luck to you.
Sir. Thank you guys, man.
All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed that podcast. Hopefully you got something from it. Again, the way that I think about this, you guys may see, I take notes when I'm listening to the guests. And sometimes this is so I can remember to ask them certain questions that popped up when they were speaking. But even some of them, like I actually saved a couple ideas. This happens a lot. Like when you talk shop with black belts, I usually walk away and I've got little notes. So there's things that I want to play around with, either different ideas I want to share. Sometimes in emails, sometimes it's stuff I want to try with my students, whatever it is, I get an idea from it. And sometimes it's not even the idea that they shared, but it was talking to a person who's like giving me a particular energy that then I respond to, and then it sort of sparks ideas in my own head. We can all think about that, like where you have these conversations with people, and through the conversation, all of a sudden different ideas start coming up out of nowhere. And you're like, wow, I should do this. And so for the podcast, again, the idea that I always sort of keep in mind with this is trying to extract a couple ideas and give every one of you guys that are listening or watching, if you're on YouTube, give you something to walk away with. Right. And so again, if you listen to that, you should have at least an idea or two to implement onto your training, whether you're a coach or a jiu-jitsu practitioner. I mean, there's a lot of decent takeaways in that podcast if you're listening to it. And so again, when you get one, just write that sucker down or keep it in your head, whatever you need to do, and try to execute on that the next time you're training or the next week when you're coming up, whatever it is. And so again, hopefully you guys enjoyed the podcast, and big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys want to get a premier CBD product that is third-party tested to ensure the purity of what's in the product, so you're not getting some sort of weird bathtub CBD that someone's cooked up that may or may not have what's labeled on the bottle, right? Because that's a situation with an FDA unregulated product. Again, the FDA gets a bad rap sometimes, rightfully so. But one of the things that they do is they ensure, like when someone's putting labels on things, this is what's supposed to be in it. And so again, one of the things that they do is they have their products third-party tested, so you can ensure that what is on the labels, what's inside that bottle, and that is what you're taking as a supplement. And again, you can get that by going to charlottesweb.com, and you can get 30% off at checkout using the promo code Chewjitsu30 at checkout. Also, if you want to get some new jiu-jitsu gear or apparel for yourself, for someone you know, getting around Christmas time, so obviously gifts and things like that are always fun. You can go to epicrollbjj.com. My buddy Matt runs the company. Cool designs, great stuff, good gear, everything in between. I mean, like it's just good all around. Find whatever you like. And again, if you get something, use the promo code Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. If you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Along with supporting the podcast, we'll do our best to support you with updated content each week. Along with that, we have a library of content from all the guests that we've had on the podcast, giving you some tip or idea, something tangible that you could execute on. And again, I find these interesting. I get a lot from these podcasts as we're having conversations with people. I'm sure you do too. And so again, we always ask the guests some different idea that we think could be useful to someone. And so you have a library of that where if you wanted to, you could go through. And each morning you wake up, you could watch a video one, and then you could say, okay, I have something to work on the next day I go train. And again, these aren't techniques so much as it is ideas for training. Because again, I'm sure you guys are up to your eyeballs in techniques. It's fine. This is more of a situation where we're saying, hey, here is a tribe of black belts and doctors and all these different intelligent people who have been doing this stuff for a long time. And here's something to take away that could work for you with your training. So again, you can get that at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And guys, last but not least, you can get my daily email if you should choose to, and 2 free Jiu-Jitsu ebooks at jujitsu.net/join, JOIN. Upon joining, you'll get access to the 2 ebooks, which goes into focusing your jiu-jitsu and some ideas on training strategies. Could be really useful if you're a coach, could be useful if you are a student. And then along with that, you'll get my daily email, which can go into everything from jiu-jitsu training tips, stories from training, and ideas to take away and to chew on for your training, right? Along with I'm a big fan of philosophy and ideas. So I share a lot of little bits and pieces of books that I'm reading, and I'll share the books that I'm reading from time to time, giving reading lists in case you're a reader as well, and a lot more. But again, you can get all access to all that by going to my website at jujitsu.net/join, and you'll get my daily email. So guys, with that said, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the podcast with Sean. Check him out on Instagram if you guys want to follow him and his team, and we'll talk to you next week.